would like to begin with one hadith which I was going through yesterday. You know, when I was reading the life of Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anhu, I came across a hadith which was really beautiful and I think is worth sharing. Remember, we mentioned that Sayyiduna Umar radiallahu anhu is Sayyiduna Umar because of his love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Today we're talking about him, we're praising him. Why? Because of his love for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, before I mention the hadith, you know, there's a question which I would ask myself if I ask you that how beloved would it be for you if for example, your parents or someone who you did not love, they weren't Muslims, and how beloved would it be for you to want them to accept Islam? I mean, this would be the most beloved thing to you. You know, the people whom you love, you want them to be with you in Jannah as well, of course. Yeah, especially if they're your parents. Now, we know that the father of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab, he did not believe. Now, look at the love of Sayyidina Umar for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had an uncle, Sayyidina Abbas radiyallahu anhu, who accepted Islam later. But now Sayyidina Umar, he says that the Islam, the Iman of the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Sayyidina Abbas, is more beloved to me than the Iman of my father Khattab. And then he says the reason for this is because if my father Khattab had accepted Islam, that would make me happy and that would make me smile. But now if the uncle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam accepts Islam, then that would make Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam be happy and that would make Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam smile. So therefore he says that the Iman of the uncle of Rasulullah is more beloved to me. Why? Because that would bring a smile onto the face of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now we want to go through his khilafah today. So we know that after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam left this world, Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu was the first caliph. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in the hadith that after me there will be 30 years of al-khilafatul rashida, the rightly guided caliphate. There will be 30 years of that. So now Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu, he was the Khalifa for around 2 years. He leaves this world. Now, how did Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu become the Khalifa? He was simply chosen by Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now the question is, why did Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu choose Sayyidina Umar to be the Khalifa, to be the leader of the Muslims after him? The reason for this is because the main advisor to Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu was Sayyidina Umar. So now Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu knew that the person who is the most capable to lead the Muslims today after me is Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Likewise, there's a hadith which is mentioned in Tirmidhi that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that after me, iqtadu, now follow Umar, Abu Bakr and Umar after me. In another hadith he is mentioned that there was a person who came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with some sadaqah, with some zakah, and he came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who should I present this to? Meaning this sadaqah which I have, this zakah that I have, who should I present this to? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, give it to me. He said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, next time if I come and I do not find you, if you're not here, you're not present, who should I give this to? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that give it to Abu Bakr. He said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, فَإِن لَمْ أَجِدْهُ, if I do not find Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu, meaning that now you have left this world, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq will leave this world, so who should I give this wealth to? So at that time Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, give it to Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So these are indications from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that after me it will be Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu, and after Abu Bakr as-Siddiq it will be Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So now Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu chose Sayyidina Umar to be the Khalifa. Now when Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu became the Khalifa, you will see that, as I mentioned last week, that we can't go through the life of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab. Yeah, it'll take us many sessions talking about his achievements, his life, his character. It's too long, but we'll inshallah mention few highlights from the life of Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala. Now when he became the Khalifa, every single Sahabi was satisfied that Umar is our leader. So there was not even one Sahabi who objected. Why? Because as I said, the main advisor to Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu was Sayyidina Umar. So they knew now the person who's the most capable, that is Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu. Now some people, they had one objection. And that objection is the nature, or what we can say, the harshness of Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu. That Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu anhu, he had that strict nature. But now Sayyidina Umar, as soon as he became the Khalifa, the first khutbah he gave, he mentioned this. He said that if I am harsh, I will be harsh for the ones who do not act upon the Sharia, who oppose the Sharia. And then he said the people who follow the Sharia, they will see my soft side. And there will be many examples coming to the soft side of Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now if you look at the Khilafah of Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu anhu, his Khilafah is admired by not only the Muslims and non-Muslims. Are you going to see that, there are many books written on the Khilafah of Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Sayyidina Umar. And the famous Gandhi from the subcontinent, he often used to mention in his speeches that I am compelled. He says, when I talk about politics, I'm compelled to mention the name of Abu Bakr and Umar radiyallahu anhuma. Why? Because the works they have done for their people and their society. So Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu anhu, his Khilafah is as such that even non-Muslims, they use his Khilafah, his leadership, his rule as an example. Now if you look at his Khilafah and how he would care about everyone, it is mentioned that Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu would often say that even if one animal dies on a river bank, due to hunger or thirst or any way or form, Sayyidina Umar would say that, I feel that I will be questionable about that animal on the Day of Judgment. I mean, this is how the leaders need to be. This is how the leaders need to be. So Sayyidina Umar, he says, if an animal dies, I feel I will be responsible for this on the Day of Judgment. And one of the most beautiful things you're going to learn from the life of Sayyidina Umar after he became the Ameer al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers, is that whenever he saw that someone in Medina is deprived from something, he would make himself deprived from that as well. So for example, he saw that someone was not, they did not have the ability to buy meat and eat it. Or someone who could not eat a certain fruit or vegetable. So now because they couldn't afford it, Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, he would not eat that and he would make himself deprived from that. And we mentioned last week that Sayyidina Umar, he had light skin. He had light skin tone. But when he became the Khalifa, the Sahaba, they say that his skin tone used to change. Sometimes it would be light, sometimes it would be dark, sometimes it would be pale. And they say that the reason for this is because of lack of nutrition, because of his diet. Why? Because when he used to see that the people are going through difficulty, he would not eat himself. This is Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, talking about his simplicity. Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu anhu, he is that same person, inshallah we'll cover briefly, that it was under his leadership that the Muslims, they defeated the Persians, they defeated the Romans, but yet Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, you'd never find him with any guard. He would walk around the streets of Medina during the night with one of his servants. So he's mentioned, there are many narrations we can mention. He's mentioned that once, there was a person, an ambassador, he came and he wanted to see Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu. So he came to the people of Medina, he said, where is your Khalifa, where is your leader? So they said, go to such and such orchard, such and such garden, and you'll find him there. So he went there, and what does he see? That a person, he's lying down under the shade of a tree, and he does not have a pillow, rather he uses a stone or a brick as his pillow. So this is the simplicity of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. And then if you look at his life, it is mentioned that once there was a person and he came to Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, he said that we have lost a camel. And that camel was owned by the Baytul Mal. So the public endowment, the welfare, and we can't find it. It's mentioned that Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, during the night he stood up and he started to walk around looking for that camel. Why? Because that camel belonged to the public, the wealth of the public. So this is Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Is mentioned regarding his clothes, he would wear simple clothes. And inshallah we'll mention the story when he went to Al-Quds, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. But there's another narration which is mentioned that once the Sahaba, they got together and they spoke to themselves and they said, look, we need to speak to Umar radiallahu anhu. Yeah, Umar, he's too simple. And now, he's the leader of the believers, and we have many, ambassadors coming, many people from different backgrounds. And when they see him, he doesn't have the best clothes, he has stitches on his clothes. So let's speak to him and say to him, look, when someone comes, at least wear something which is nice. Yeah, which would show that you're the leader. So now the question was that who will go to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. So it's mentioned that they went to Sayyidina Ali, that, oh Ali radiallahu anhu, that Umar would always take your advice. So go to him. He said, okay, so what should I say? And they mentioned to him that this is the issue, that we want him to wear better clothes when people come to see him. So Sayyidina Ali said, anything I would say to Umar, but not this. Yeah, I can say anything else, but not this. So they said, who can speak to him then? So they went to Sayyidatuna Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu ta'ala anha. And she said, okay, I will speak to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. So it's mentioned that she called Sayyidina Umar, and Sayyidina Umar, being the leader of the believers, went to the house of Ummul Mu'mineen, Sayyidah Aisha, the mother of the believers. And Sayyidah Aisha mentioned, she said, look, the Sahaba, they have this worry about you. This is an issue that you should, because your clothes have many stitches, we have many people from different places of the world now visiting us, so they want you to wear something nice when they come. Now it is mentioned that Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, he said to Sayyidah Aisha, oh Aisha, Siddiqa Ummul Mu'mineen, the mother of the believers, is this something which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would tell me to do? Is this according to the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or is it the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam to live in simplicity? Sayyidah Aisha Siddiqa says, I did not have an answer for him. And Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu left, and he called everyone, and he gave a khutbah. But remember now, why would Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu would do this? Even though he is the same person that he came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when Rasulullah was alive, present in this world, and he said that, Ya Rasulullah, he bought some silk, their clothes made out of silk. And he said, Ya Rasulullah, wear these. And then he said, Ya Rasulullah, the Roman leaders or the Persians, they wear the best of clothes, and Alhamdulillah, Allah has given us enough now, so you should be wearing this. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, men are not allowed silk. And they have their share in the dunya, we have our share in the akhirah. So I said, Umar, once he heard this from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you could imagine now, this is the main reason why he is so simple. So nevertheless, he called the people and he gave a khutbah. And in the khutbah he mentioned, one of the stories which we mentioned last week as well, he mentioned that, I was a shepherd, and I used to shepherd the camels of my father Khattab, or my family members, my uncles, my aunts from my mother's side, and they used to give me a handful amount of barley, and that's it. And the Sahaba said to him later on that, what was the reason for you mentioning this? Yeah, Alhamdulillah, you're the leader now, you don't have to, why are you mentioning your past? Yeah, that was not a good time, that you were getting something really small. So he said, I wanted people to know that that was my reality. So today, if I'm the leader of the believers, it is because of the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is because of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but I want people to know my reality. Yeah, so this is the leader of the believers, Sayyiduna Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now moving on, talking about the justice of Sayyiduna Umar. Yeah, he is known for justice. He's mentioned, we always hear that once there was an earthquake in the time of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, and he placed his foot onto the earth, and he said to the earth, O earth, why are you shaking? Isn't Umar doing justice upon you? Yeah, this is the justice of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. But what he did was, in order to make sure that there's justice on earth, what he did was he set some rules. So the first set of rules were for the qudat, the judges. So he's mentioned that one of the famous judges in his time was Al-Qadi Shuray. Now when he became the judge, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu gave him advice. He said, look, do not do evil to people, do not give loss to people, and do not do too much buying and selling with people. Why? Because when you buy, when you sell, what happens? You build a connection with people. Sometimes when you're buying something, they might not charge you as much. When you're selling something, they might give you something on top. Then he said that do not accept bribery. So he gave this advice to Sayyidina Qadi Shuray. Now when he gave this advice, it's mentioned that he would act upon this advice. Now for all the judges, he would give them some piece of advice. But one of the things he said to all the judges that you are not allowed to accept gifts from people. Yeah, you're not allowed to accept. Why? The reason for this is because when people start giving you gifts, when people start sending you gifts, what happens is that then they expect you to do the decision in their favor. Or sometimes your heart becomes soft for them. Why? Because you feel to yourself, wait, that person, he looks after me. He gave me this gift. So therefore I owe it to him. Yes, so Sayyiduna Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu said to them that you should not be accepting gifts. Likewise, he is mentioned regarding Sayyiduna Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu regarding his justice, that once there was a dispute between Sayyidina Umar, so the leader of the believers, Ameer al-Mu'mineen, and Sayyidina Ubay bin Ka'ab, another companion, regarding something. So now they went to the court, and at that time the judge was Sayyidina Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu. So some of the cases Sayyidina Zayd bin Thabit radiallahu anhu he would hear in his house. Yeah, so he was at home, so Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu and Sayyidina Ubay bin Ka'ab went to the house of Zayd bin Thabit. Now the first thing Sayyidina Zayd bin Thabit he did was that when he saw Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he stood up and he gave his seat to Sayyidina Umar, saying that you're the Ameer al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the believers. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said, no, I have not come as the leader of the believers. Today I have come in order to seek justice. Yeah, so now both of them, Ubay bin Ka'ab radiallahu anhu and Sayyidina Umar, they sat in front of Zayd bin Thabit. Now, it's a long narration into what happened, but to summarize. So now the decision was in the favor of Ubay bin Ka'ab. Now Sayyid bin Thabit radiallahu anhu, he showed softness towards Sayyidina Umar. Why? Because he's the leader of the believers. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu later, he said to Sayyidina Zayd radiallahu anhu that you should not be the judge. Why? Because you made two mistakes. The first mistake was that you were offering me your seat. The second mistake was that you were showing me softness. And it should not be like this. Even though Sayyidina Zayd bin Thabit was doing it out of honor, that he's a leader of the believers, this is the justice of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Now talking about, we learn about Sayyidina Umar, we say he was really harsh and he had a strict nature. But that was only for the sake of Islam. Yeah, that was only for the sake of Iman, for the Sharia of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He has mentioned that, once Sayyidina Umar, he came late for Jumu'ah. Yeah, so in those times there were no clocks and watches and, there was no set time. Yeah, so adhan would be done and he would come. So now he was delayed. So when Sayyidina Umar came late, Sayyidina Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, he stood up, one of the poor companions. He said, "Oh Umar, you are the leader of the believers. We understand you're busy, but we are people who go out for labor. So now if you come late, then how will we earn?" Now Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, rather than saying anything, Sayyidina Abu Dharr al-Ghifari, rather than scolding at him, was saying you will be punished. This is how it would be today. Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiallahu anhu said that if people like you are present in any kingdom, then the leader of that kingdom will never go astray. From this what we learn is that today our leaders, sometimes we feel that they're not right. The question is the public. Because is the public, what are they doing? Do the public understand their own rights or not? Do the public put the leaders to question? No. So this was Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He's also mentioned that once, there was some wealth which came from Yemen, and in it there were some pieces of cloth. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu gave everyone a share. Now one of the Jum'ahs he came and he was wearing a full qamis out of that cloth. So the Sahaba, they stood up and they said, "Oh Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, you're wearing this, but if we look at the pieces of cloth that you gave to us, it was not possible for us to make a qamis out of it. It was too small. So how come you got a full qamis?" Again, the point we're mentioning is Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, they asked him these questions, even though he's known for his harshness and his strict nature. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said, "Call my son Abdullah bin Umar." Then Sayyidina Umar said that my son Abdullah bin Umar gave me his share, and from both of them I made this qamis for myself. So this was the justice of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. There are many other narrations. For example, it is mentioned that the king of Ghassan, Yeah, the king of Ghassan, so Ghassan was a little kingdom, he accepted Islam, and he came to Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, and he realized that Sayyidina Umar is going to perform Hajj. So he said to Sayyidina Umar, I want to perform Hajj as well. So he had around 500 people with him, they all accepted Islam at the same time. So when they were performing Hajj, it's mentioned that, whilst performing Tawaf, one of the poor Muslims in Mecca, he actually accidentally stepped on the jubbah of this king. So the king slapped him so hard that the nose of this person broke. So now he took his case into the court of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. And he said, look, this king, he has slapped me. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu called the king. Now the king thinking, no, I'm the king. And normally this is how our politicians think today. That there are no set rules for us. Why? Because we are the politicians, we are the ministers. Yeah, we have the power. So now this king had the same sort of mentality. So Sayyidina Umar said, no, yeah, this is Islam. So that poor person was called, and the king was told that this person will either slap you in the same manner, or you can ask him and he will forgive you. That king, he said, no, a person who's poor, who's not at my level, my caliber, he can't hit me, and I can't seek forgiveness from him. He threatened Sayyidina Umar by saying, I will leave Islam. So Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu said, look, I cannot change the Islamic laws because of you. And this is the justice of Sayyidina Umar. Even though Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, what he could have done was that he could have called that poor person and said, you know what, calm down. He's a king, he just accepted Islam. No. Yeah, this would show that the rights for the poor people in Islam, they're not given. Yeah, so this is how the rights were given to the poor people in Islam. Also is mentioned regarding the governor of Egypt, Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, that when he was the governor of Egypt, his son, he had a race with another person. Yeah, according to some narrations, he was a non-Muslim, the other person. So after the race, the son of Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, he won and he lashed the other person. That person came to Medina from Egypt with this case. He said that the governor of Egypt, Sayyidina Amr, his son has lashed me. And at that time, his son said to, Sayyidina Amr's son said to that person that I am the son of the governor and I can do this. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu not only called the son, but he also called Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. And he said, this person will lash your son, and at the same time, he will lash you as well. Why? The reason for this is because your son used your name. Yeah, so this is the justice, and this is what Islam talks about. Now talking about Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, he fulfilled the rights of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are many narrations for this which we can mention from the life of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. Is mentioned that first of all, in terms of the learning of the people, yeah, it's mentioned that he made it necessary for the people of Medina to learn about Islam, and the education for them was free. Yeah, so meaning in simple, like how we can term is, simple schools and madrasas, yeah, for free. So free education was there for everyone in Medina. Likewise, all these benefits that we see today, yeah, child benefit or the pensions, these were actually informed and invented by Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. It's mentioned, when he conquered Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa and he went there, he saw poor Christians there. And he said, who are these people? And he said, these are poor Christians. Yeah, some of them were priests. And Sayyidina Umar said that, look at them and, if they're eligible, give them the pension. Yeah, so this was actually introduced by Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Is mentioned that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, people who would come to visit Medina, he would go and look after them himself. He was so hospitable. It's mentioned that, whenever a mujahid would go out to fight in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu would check upon their families. Yeah, he would ask the families if they need anything. So this is huququl ibad of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu regarding his taqwa. Yeah, I want to mention one story regarding the taqwa, his great piety. It is mentioned that in Medina, in the time of Sayyidina Umar, there was a person, a young man, and he really liked a young woman, and he would always invite her. Yeah, he would call her, and he would want to get to know her. So once she got tired, and she said, okay, the only way you can, come close to me, we can get married, is if you pray salah behind Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu for 40 days. So after 40 days, I promise you I will meet you at this very place. So he said, okay. So for 40 days, he prayed behind Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. For 40 days. After 40 days, as promised, that woman, she was waiting for him in that very place. And what did she see? That that person, he's coming from that same direction, but he does not even look at her. He does not even look at her. She asked him that, I promised you for 40 days you'll pray, and today I'm waiting for you and you don't even look at me. He said that this was 40 days before. Yeah, after 40 days, after praying behind Umar radiallahu anhu, the heart of this person has changed. Yeah, now I don't have you in my heart, I have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in my heart. So this was due to praying behind Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. And this is what happens, when if the A'immah, if they have taqwa, piety, and this has the effect on the people who are following. Now just to quickly mention regarding some of the conquests. Yeah, we won't go into detail. Why? Because for example, we hear about the Battle of Yarmouk or Qadisiyah. Yeah, inshallah, once we talk about the people who were in them, Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid, Sayyidina Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah, inshallah, then we'll cover them more in detail. But now in the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, regarding conquest, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, Allah had given him a political mindset. Yeah, and he understood which person is the best in which place. He has mentioned that one of the things he did was that he realized that the Banu Umayyah, who were the Banu Umayyah, the family of Sayyidina Abu Sufyan radiallahu anhu. Yeah, he realized that they had a political mindset. So the elder son of Sayyidina Sufyan, Sayyidina Yazid, who was a Sahabi, Yazid bin Abi Sufyan, he made him the governor of Syria, Sham at that time. And later on he passed away due to a plague. And there was a massive plague, and then many Muslims mentioned around 20,000 people died due to that plague. And many great companions. It's mentioned Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah also died due to that plague. This is Sayyidina Yazid bin Abi Sufyan, Sayyidina Mu'adh bin Jabal, famous name. Yeah, so these companions died due to that plague. So now, when he passed away, then after that Sayyidina Muawiyah radiallahu anhu became the governor. And then after Sayyidina Muawiyah, it was Yazid, and then we learn about Karbala. So Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, what he did was now, that when Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu left this world, Sayyidina Abu Bakr as-Siddiq sent Sayyidina Khalid towards Iraq and Sham to conquer these places. Yeah, so Sayyidina Khalid was the leader who was leading these battles. Now what Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu did was that he dismissed Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid and he appointed Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah. What was the reason behind this? There are many reasons which are mentioned. Some people, they mention a reason, which is not true, but we need to know this. They say one of the reasons why he removed Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid and appointed Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah was because Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid, he was conquering a lot of land and people thought that, he's the safe of Allah, and they were praising him too much. So much so that he had fear that, they would say he's a special being. This wasn't the reality. The main reason, what we understand, Sayyidina Umar removed Sayyidina Khalid radiallahu anhu was, the reason behind that was that, Sayyidina Umar had a different mindset in terms of the strategies and the tactics in comparison to Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid. And Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu anhu was a greater Sahabi, and he is one of the Ashara Mubashshara. So therefore, and then there was wisdom in this. Why? Because through the hands of Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah, many conquests took place. Like for example, the conquest of Jerusalem, it was through mainly Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, in the time of Sayyidina Umar, the main cities which were taken first, it was Damascus. Remember, Damascus was one of the main cities in the world at that time. It is one of the oldest cities in the world. It's been there for thousands of years. So it was a center of the economical world at that time. So the economy in Damascus was really good. Why? Because there was a Silk Route which was coming from Rome and going through Damascus towards China. So Damascus was a really important place. So Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiallahu anhu, he went, and also with him was Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid. So Khalid bin Walid was there, he was still leading, but over him someone who's appointed over him was Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah. It's mentioned there were 6 gates towards Damascus. So now there was a long siege of Damascus, according to some narrations up to 4 months. So for 4 months there was no food going in and out, there was no much movement. So at the end is mentioned now that on one side you were Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid, who entered through battle. And on the other side you were Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah, and he entered through an agreement. And now when Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah entered and Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid is entering through battle, right in the middle of the city they met. Yes, so now this is why in Islam you find that certain cities are those cities in which the people surrendered. Yeah, like we're going to go through Al-Quds, Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa, they surrendered. And some of them are conquered. So that regarding Damascus, half of it was conquered and half of them came through them surrendering. Yeah, so so this is what you find. Yeah, so Sayyidina Khalid, this is why it is mentioned that if you go to Damascus today, it's mentioned that to a certain point, this is where Sayyidina Khalid bin Walid came up to whilst he was fighting, and then he met Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah. So half of the city came through agreement and half of the city came through fighting and conquering. Now Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, now moving on, after Damascus they moved towards Jerusalem. Yeah, so moving towards Jerusalem. Now Jerusalem, this after conquering Damascus, this gave Muslims confidence. So now they thought we should move towards Jerusalem. So Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiyallahu anhu, so again there were many battles within this. Yeah, it's not that only one of battles, there were many battles. When he reached Jerusalem now, and there was a long siege. There was a long siege. But what happened was that before the people of Jerusalem surrendered, what they said was that we will only give the keys to the leader, your Khalifa Sayyiduna Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So when they did this now, so Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah agreed to this. He says, okay, so Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu came. Now it's a famous story that he came on a camel with one slave, and then they would sit on the camel with turns. So for some time the slave and then Sayyidina Umar. So now when they were entering Jerusalem at that time, it was the turn of the slave to sit on the camel, and Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu was holding the camel from the front. And the people at that time saw that, is this the leader? Is this the person? Meaning that the slave must have been dark. Yeah, so maybe he did not have the same the ru'ab as Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu. So now Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu entered. And before entering, he performed wudu. It's mentioned that when he was performing wudu, he went to the river and he took off his leather socks and he placed them on his shoulders. When he placed them on his shoulders, it's mentioned now that Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiyallahu anhu was not happy with this. Remember, Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah is the Ameer of this ummah. So he was not happy with this. Why? Because now you got many rulers, leaders, bishops waiting for the leader of the believers. So remember, the leader of the believers at that time was not only a political figure, he was also a religious figure as well. It's now that we have different, politicians are different and religious leaders are different. At that time it was all one. So now a person who's a Muslim leader in terms of politics and in terms of religion as well, he's entering. So when he's entering, he has his leather socks on his shoulders. Saying Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah, he said, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I do not ma yusirruni, this does not seem good to me. Leader of the believers, your clothes, you have stitches on them. You're going to meet some of the most honorable people in this, in Jerusalem. So therefore, this is not nice. At that time, Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu anhu, he became furious. And he said, Oh Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah radiyallahu anhu, if I never knew your greatness, your virtues, you're the Amin of this ummah, you're from the Ashara Mubashara, then I would have lashed you. And then he said that inna kunna adhalla qawmin. He said, Oh Abu Ubaidah bin Jarrah, that we were the worst of people. The Quraysh, living in the time of Jahiliyyah. فَقَدْ أَعَزَّنَا اللَّهُ بِالْإِسْلَامِ. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gave us izzah, honor through Islam. Yeah, so look at Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiyallahu anhu. This is the mentality of certain people today. We observe that keeping a beard or wearing the Islamic attire, they wouldn't go to places, marketplaces with this. Why? Feeling shy, thinking, okay, this will dishonor Islam, or this will dishonor me, or I will look like the odd one out. So Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu said to Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah, no, Remember, we have this honor because of Islam. And then at that time, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu said to Sayyidina Abu Ubaidah, remember that the only thing which will take people away from Islam and the only thing which will dishonor Islam is you leaving your own religion for others. And this is what we observe today. Yeah, the reason why, because what are the Muslims doing? We have adopted the Western culture. We give that priority over our own culture. When it comes to eating, eating with your hands is sunnah. We don't feel comfortable eating together. Yeah, in one tray is sunnah, but we are not comfortable with that. Yeah, so from many reasons, one of the reasons why we are what we are today is because the state that we are in today is because we have left the teachings of Islam. Nevertheless, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu enters Jerusalem. Now when he enters Jerusalem, it is mentioned that the Christians at that time, they wanted the Muslims to rule over them rather than the Byzantines. And the main reason for that was because the Byzantines, they were ruthless people. They weren't giving them their rights. They knew that Islam would come and would give them their rights. And this is what happened. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu made an agreement. He said, okay, you have your churches, you do your worship, but you shouldn't, the ringing of the bell, you're not allowed to do this. Yeah, adhan will happen, it will be loud, but you cannot. Some people might object today, why did Sayyidina Umar, there's no religious freedom. No, but those people at that time were more happy with Sayyidina Umar saying this rather than their own Christian leaders leading them. And those people were happy, they agreed to this. And then Sayyidina Umar radiallahu entered, and then he went to the church where the Christians believe that Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam, he was buried and then he was resurrected from. So that is mentioned that Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu went to that church and it was Dhuhr time. The bishop at that time said, pray here. He said, no. The reason for this is because my people, if I pray here, later on they will make a masjid. So he went outside and he prayed, and this is what happened later. So the people who do go to Jerusalem, they see Masjid Umar radiallahu anhu there. Now what this bishop, he saw Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, what he did was that he gave the keys to Sayyidina Umar. He said that the keys for this church are given to you. The reason why he did this again is because at that time there were many sects erupting within the Christian faith. So now he thought, rather than us arguing again and again, someone will come and say, I should have the key. So he gave it to Sayyidina Umar, and Sayyidina Umar gave it to one of the Muslim families. And until today, it is mentioned that the same family holds the keys of that church. Yeah, so this is the justice of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, that he took Jerusalem without any bloodshed. And you see later, few centuries later, when the Crusaders, when they retook Jerusalem from the Muslims, they massacred the Muslims. Many Muslims were killed. There was blood on the streets of Jerusalem. And then later, inshallah, if we go through the life of Sultan Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, when he reconquered Jerusalem, again it was on the same way as Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Now, so Jerusalem was taken. Now when Jerusalem was taken, Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, he came to Sayyidina Umar, he said, look, we've got Damascus, we've got Jerusalem, let's go towards Egypt. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu was a bit hesitant, but then he agreed. Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, alongside around 4,000 companions, he went towards Egypt. Now when he went towards Egypt, Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu wanted to stop him. So he sent a letter, and in the letter he wrote that if you have not entered Egypt, return, we need you here. So Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu did not open the letter, he said, I'll open it tomorrow. So the next day he opened it, but as soon as he opened it, what he done was they realized that that night they had entered Egypt. They had entered Egypt. So now when he saw the letter, and he really wanted to conquer Egypt, so he saw the letter and he said, it says here that if you have not entered, even though he had received the letter the day before and they had not entered, but now I'm reading and we have entered, so therefore we will carry on. And there was wisdom in that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through Sayyidina Al-Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, gave the Muslims Egypt. So this is how Egypt was taken. So again, there were many small battles, and they were conquering small lands. At the end, they went to Alexandria, and that was the main place. And then they conquered that. Again, it is mentioned that when they were conquering that, it was really difficult. They did the siege, but that was not successful. Why? Because the people at that time, they were getting their food and everything through the sea. But then he's mentioned that at that time, the Heraclius at that time, he said, I will go and fight the Muslims myself in Alexandria. And then it's mentioned that he prepared his army, and as soon as he was about to sit in his ship so that he can travel towards Alexandria, is mentioned he died. So again, you see that this is the wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when he died, again there was a chaos within their kingdom or within the empire at that time. So then the people of Alexandria, they said, okay, the Muslims can come and they can rule over us. Remember that was really a place where Christianity was being practiced, and the main universities, libraries, the centers were in Alexandria. And then this is how the Muslims actually conquered Alexandria, through the hands of Sayyidina Amr Ibn As radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, during the time of Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu. Before we finish, one of the miracles of Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu is mentioned that when Sayyidina Amr was in Egypt, the river Nile, sometimes it would stop flowing. It would become empty, there would be no water. So what the Egyptians would do, they had a tradition that they would get a woman and she would be dressed really nicely with all the jewels, and they would take her there and they would slaughter her there, and then the water would come out. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he said, no, this is not going to happen in Islam. So he wrote to Sayyidina Umar, he said, this is a tradition, so what's the solution? Sayyidina Umar wrote a letter, and he said, throw this letter to the river Nile, and within it Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu was referring to the river Nile that come out and flow for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this is how the water came out and is still flowing today. After that, since then, it never ever, the water has always been flowing. Yeah, so this is Sayyidina Umar Ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'll just take you back to the hadith which we mentioned, Sayyidina Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, he said that since Umar radiyallahu anhu accepted Islam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given honor to Islam. So honor was given to Islam through Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevate their ranks, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive our sins through the wasila of Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, inshallah. Ameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammadin wa barik wa sallim wa salli alayhi. اللهم تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم. اللهم إنا نسألك العفو والعافية في الدين والدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا طيبا وعملا متقبلا، ونفوض أمورنا إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد. وصلى الله على حبيبه سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.